Now, naturally, there has to be some kind of a issue tonight. Making sure here that I might have to not go live here for a second. I'll have to take the stream down. Probably going to cause some kind of a problem. Or maybe we can just trust that file name formatting. Okay, something must have updated in the time that I've used this program on this computer. I am back to my normal setup on my normal computer with my normal settings, so I am hoping that the link will go live like normal. In fact, I'm going to do this in front of everybody who might be watching. Okay, there's just one watching right now, and that person's
Hoping
me. That the streamception there for a second. We're going to go ahead and create an announcement. I'm going to say live broadcast. Live broadcast link. And doop. There it is. Send a copy immediately. And then hopefully this will serve as a way for everyone to get here tonight and or view the archive. Okay, it looks like that is good. So tonight I'm going to basically kind of answer some questions about the survey assignment and some things that I hit the wrong button. This is a new screen. We want to do that, and we want to do that. Okay. Um, so that there are some things that we need to go over. And, I do apologize for last week. Things were really hectic. As I kind of mentioned last week, I had to do an unusual broadcast schedule in the first place because things had really, what's a good expression for a good professional expression here? Um, Things had kind of gone to heck in a handbasket. We had one of my chief responsibilities actually is to help manage the debate program, and unfortunately, my boss had his father-in-law pass away, and he passed away in a very far away, and this necessitated me taking over all of the face-to-face classes and meetings and fiduciary responsibilities of the program for all of last week and actually part of this week as well. So that's kind of why I was a little more out of contact than usual. In addition to that, I was trying to stream on hardware that was not the usual laptop over a wireless connection, and that wasn't really helping out for us either. But I hope that now that I'm back to kind of normal here, things are going to be just fine. So I do apologize for the instability, and hopefully tonight we can get some questions answered. We've got some 4 people watching right now. We've been live for about 3 minutes, so we can go ahead and get started on at least my planned content. And literally, if you have any questions, guys, about anything, go ahead and write it into chat right away so that I can address it. My idea for tonight is really just to help you get a better idea of what I would like for you to do for your survey and for your informative speech. All right. So let's go ahead and start talk about the survey basics and what, in addition to the things that Liz had talked about last week, um, what I envisioned for this assignment. And there were a lot of, not really a lot, but there were people questioning that, a lot of people had chosen surveys about TV shows. And I noticed that too as I was looking at the links rolling in on the surveys. And there's nothing really wrong with that. But the intent of the survey, of this survey, is to do a survey over a topic that you want to present in your next speech. All right. So asking questions about a popular TV show that you might want to talk about is totally legitimate. You were not necessarily locked into that idea because that was the idea that Liz did. If there is something else you want to talk about, like Himalayan salt lamps and the New Age healing properties thereof, um, you can go ahead and do that if you would like. And if you have, um, if you want to, now realizing having me say that, if you want to go ahead, if you want to redo your survey, you can do that as well. Just make sure that in your email you write, this is my real survey. Disregard the last one. But otherwise, that's kind of the purpose of it, is to ask questions over things that you think might be useful to guide your preparation for the informative speech. And I will talk about the informative speech rubric and the assignment, um, probably, not by probably, I mean next week. We are not actually behind at all. According to my syllabus little calendar there, we are just about right on schedule to have our one speech a month. So we are not behind at all. So that's good news. How many speeches do we have? We're going to have formats, outlines, templates. Meg, that was a great question. Um, on the syllabus, I do believe there are 4 speeches, one of which was the intro speech that you've already done. There's going to be an informative speech, which is this one, another informative type speech, um, I'm sorry, a light persuasive speech, and then we're going to have the full formal persuasive speech, which is kind of like the course capstone. And they average out to be one a month. So technically, we had January speech earlier this month with your introduction speech. We'll have this month's speech towards the end of February, which would be, 2 weeks from now, and then we'll have one in March, and then we'll have one in April. So, and yes, we will have more sophisticated outlines and formats as time goes on, but we're starting kind of more freestyle in it. The intro speech really was just answering some questions. This informative speech, as I'm going to talk about next week when I assign it formally, is really just about how to present facts in an interesting way. And then the next 2 are about persuasive techniques. Right. So there will be some increasing sophistication here, but we're not quite there yet. What we really just want to know right now is what your audience is made of and what they might think about your next topic. So what are surveys good for? I hope that answered your question. I'm going to go ahead and move on here, but if it doesn't, go ahead and write back in chat, and I'll respond. Okay, so what are surveys good for? Surveys are good for a variety of things. There's different types of analysis, and I know we talked about this last week, so we're going to breeze right through this slide here. They're good for demographic analysis, for seeing a snapshot of your audience, who they are. For example, if you do choose um, a TV show, you can. Wouldn't you know it? I'm in a live broadcast and someone is knocking on the door like the house is burning down. I am just going to take this for just a second. I'll be right back, guys. Sorry about that wonderful dead air there. In the meantime, though, I see that Natalie Erdman has asked a question. When will we get a grade on our first speech? I guess that's a good question, Natalie. The first speech was actually a kind of a completion grade. Um, if you do not see a grade, you know what? Now that I think of it, did I publish those grades? I probably didn't. But I had recorded them. So those of you who actually did your introduction speech, I did breeze through them. I didn't grade you on anything like poise or delivery. I just wanted to see that you could master the technology in terms of getting a speech up. And I do believe with the couple of people that I did email after that week, everybody did. So as long as you turn in a speech, you can assume that your grade is full. If you don't have a grade, I will check on that to make sure that I made those visible to everybody. But yeah, if you turned it in, you got full credit. So you just don't need to really worry about it, Natalie. So Yeah, that was a good question though. It's probably because it came that evaluation week kind of came during that critical period in which things got a little crazy, and I do apologize for that. And I thank you for your patience with me on that week or past couple weeks with the flu and then all that fun stuff. It's been great. Rough start to a semester a little bit, but we're all right. So where was I before we were so rudely interrupted? Demographic analysis. Um, yes, the next speech is the informative one, Jeff. Excellent. Yes, good questions. And that's what the survey should be about, your topic for that speech. So if you already turned in a survey and you thought it had to be over a TV show and you don't want to do a TV show for your informative speech, then that's fine. Just go ahead and make a new one if you choose, if you so choose. I mean, if you don't make a new survey, then you're kind of locked into your TV show topic. But you can go ahead and make a new one and just put in the text of your email submitting the second link that we should disregard that first survey that you sent out. Um, and that's fine. Um, and I totally understand what with the Liz having the broadcast there and maybe the instructions not being clear, and that's I take responsibility for unclear instructions, so we're not. We'll just get it done. Like I said, we're not behind. No one's behind. As long as you turn in your speech and you turn in your survey when it's ultimately due, no one's going to be out. I know this past couple weeks have been kind of confusing, and the fact this is an online course with little immediacy, little slow responses to questions compared to a typical classroom. That I understand that if you might be a little vexed right now, and that's okay. We're working through it. Anyway, what our survey is good for. So we see a snapshot of our audience. We want to understand their group memberships. Oh yeah, for example, if you really are going to do a TV show, asking someone's age might actually be fairly important, even though that might seem like just kind of a throwaway question. For example, I wanted to do a speech once about Star Trek: The Next Generation, um, but I was actually a little older than the audience I was going to give that to. And I was old enough. I'm in that magical group that watched Star Trek: The Next Generation, and you may not even know what I what I am talking about. The Captain Picard Star Trek. I'm pretty sure you know Captain Picard. He's like a universal pop culture symbol, right? Um, but anyway, I was going to do a speech about that, but my audience was young enough that they didn't actually know what Star Trek: The Next Generation was. I mean, they knew like the Enterprise and the Star Trek theme and who Captain Picard was, at least according to the other questions of the survey. But they didn't know the main show themes. They didn't know about the Borg. They didn't know about Data being an android that wanted to be a human. They didn't know other key themes in that particular series because of their age. So, and asking someone's age might be a great way to just kind of understand whether or not they were old enough or young enough to see the show that you want to cover. So it is important to do those kinds of demographic analyses. So you can ask somebody, did you have a TV in your house? How old were you in the year 2004? Um, when a series or a show premiered, right? Those are totally cool and legit questions for doing your helping you with your helping you with your speech topic. Um, it can also help you determine analogies and metaphors, and what I mean by that is that well, for example, if I wanted to use an analogy from Star Trek: The Next Generation, um, maybe doing one in this class is probably a little bit more appropriate than in my face-to-face section, because in my face-to-face section most of everybody is 18 or 19, and that's a little bit too young. They were born right around the time that Star Trek: The Next Generation was actually ending as a series, um, whereas some people in here are actually more around my age, who were probably at least um, ambulatory talking children-like entities or teenagers um, when Star Trek was still on TV, and they might have been exposed to at least some of the ideas or characters that I might want to make a comparison with. So that's another reason why you might want to use a demographic analysis. It also might be helpful for if for some reason you want to use a biblical allegory or biblical story as an analogy for something else. Determining if people actually, um, come from a Judeo-Christian background might be important to that. Otherwise, you might sound um, like somebody who's referencing some kind of material that's not relevant. I have a class that's got a lot of international students in it, and many of them are either Taiwanese or Chinese. They were not necessarily exposed to any Christian scripture. So to talk about, characters or themes or incidents from the Bible, I think I made a comment about, I forget what I was on. I mean, there's no real religious content in a state college class, but I think I made some comment about the Ark and the Great Flood, and they didn't know what I was talking about. Um, so it was I had made a comment about getting two books onto two books of every type on an Ark and saving it from being digitized. And they didn't understand what the two book the reference to the number two and the Ark was about. But anyway, so moving on here, psychological analysis. Get a non-stereotypical picture of what your audience thinks, and that's probably one of the most important things of all. Like you can't really look at someone's demographic and assume that they have, some kind of political opinion. Um, you have to um, assume that, or you can't assume those kinds of things. Like if somebody says, "Well, I'm from Goshen, Indiana," you can't really just assume that they might be Amish or have a very conservative bent to them. You have to actually ask them questions about um, their psychology or what they might believe or what their attitudes are or what their values are, and that's what Liz was talking about. Can you send the survey to people outside the class? That's a good question, Meg. Um, if you plan on having them watch your speech to complete um, any kind of course credit, then yes. And there will be times where I might ask you to show your speech to someone else. So if you know ahead of time that you're going to have your significant other watch your speech, they will be part of your audience in addition to the people in this class or people in this class who choose to share it with. So yes, you could totally give your survey to that person. But that's only if you know that about that ahead of time. I'm not going to have you, um, send a survey out to your entire like coworkers or anything. So don't worry about that. And there's also a critical part here is to figure out what your audience already knows. Um, so when I say that, it means something simple like, let's pretend that I happen to get the class with everybody that loves Star Trek. I don't necessarily have to go on spend 3 minutes of my 6 minute speech going through a cast and character rundown of the show. I can skip that and go right into something a little meatier that I might want to cover. So that's an important function of a survey too. Hope that was part of it was part of that was helpful. So here's some things that most good surveys feature, which is probably more of what you're really interested in here. Questions meant to get some demographic information, so things like age, maybe their group memberships, which would include maybe religious groups if you decide it's important. Um, Other questions like, could be with the Republican or Democrat. You could do ethnicity if you feel like ethnicity is important. Um, I had a student do, speaking of TV shows, I guess we're just kind of running that as an example. I had a student, African American student, that wanted to do a speech about the PJs. Um, and even though it was an appropriate, the students in the class were the appropriate age to have seen the show, for whatever reason, it did not appeal to the um, white students that were in the class, and so they never really watched the show. Um, it is a great claymation show by Eddie Murphy, by the way. It's kind of, I don't know if the humor translates well to this day and age, actually, but I remember it being funny. But anyway, so you might want to ask questions like that to see if it's not necessarily an appropriate topic because there's nothing wrong with that particular show, but just to see if people might have been interested in it, to see if you need to cover some background information, perhaps. So anyway, questions meant to evaluate the audience's what the audience knows about the topic. So again, if it turns out that your audience is very familiar with your topic, maybe you can go into the more obscure knowledge. Um, Next, how your audience feels about your I say proposal here. How the audience feels about your topic. In other words, you're trying to get the audience how they feel, what their attitude is towards your topic. So even though you're giving an informative speech for this one, if you're going to do your informative speech on, say, the recently ratified right to hunt amendment in the Indiana Constitution. Some people might have a very visceral reaction to that just as a topic. And might want to know what that visceral reaction is and why it might be there. So you still want, even though you might not take a stand on it for this particular speech, you still want to know if they're going to react. Um, so And then finally, it says down here, I know in a very non helpful bullet point here, it says it gets rich information. And by that I mean it gets information that is purposeful. So if you have a topic where, in your best judgment, age doesn't seem very important, then don't ask a question about age just to pad the survey. Go ahead and have a shorter survey. There's no reason to get superficial information that you know that you're not going to use. Get information that you know is useful um, for that, for the purposes of preparing your speech. So here are some other suggestions here. Again, on the rant here, all questions must have a purpose. This is kind of consistent. This is not kind of consistent. This is consistent with the post I made earlier this week. Surveys should generally be about 10 questions long. If you're going into the 11 questions, that's probably okay. But once you're starting to think about 12 questions, 13, 14, 15, you're getting a little bit too detailed. You can probably cut that down. Similarly, if you only have 3 questions, I encourage you to think about your topic and what might be necessary for someone to know something about it or to have feelings towards it. Kind of like how maybe you wouldn't think age would be important in talking about a TV show, but it might be very relevant in terms of figuring out just how, if anyone was old enough or young enough to see the show in the first place. So, um, anyway, the point is, it should be around 10 questions is good. Am I going to freak out if you have 9 or 8? No. Am I going to freak out if you have 11 or 12? No. But if you have 15 to 20 or 3 to 5, you're probably just a little bit over or under in that situation. But anyway, you should have some questions for demographic information because there is going to be some demographic type stuff that you want to know. Um, and remember things about geographic location where people are located, and SES, which is socioeconomic status, is considered demographic information. So if you're doing a doing a topic about a TV show, asking someone if they have a TV in their house is a demographic type question, and it's also very relevant to figuring out if they might have been exposed to the media that you want to talk about. And then the next thing here, I suggest that maybe you have a Likert scale type question, which is usually a 5 or 10 point scale, which you can put on a SurveyMonkey. Something like strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. That would be like a 5 point scale type deal. Or just simply rate people's reaction on a certain scale. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how unpleasant is Steve Urkel's voice? Um, um, so that might be a relevant. I'm not sure what question would be relevant for that, what our topic would be, but that's the kind of example there. You might also want to dabble in an open-ended question, which would be something where you just ask for their opinion, like, what do you think of the reboot of Full House? And that's your question, and you provide a little written answer box for them to fill in. Finally, you want to also be simple. So try to avoid surveys that sound like this. Um, If you answer no to this question, go ahead and skip to item 16. And then item 16 says, all right, here's write your opinion on this, and then go back to item 8. You want to avoid having people skip around your survey. Questions should generally be direct, and by generally I mean always direct, in that you just go ahead, and if you want to know someone's age, just say, what is your age? Um, don't necessarily try to be polite. I've had students in the past try to be what they think was polite. They're like, well, I know that you're not supposed to ask women how old they are, so I'm going to go ahead and ask, do you remember the DeLorean car rollout? And and the survey is supposed to be about, um, which for him was actually I think it was Ronald Reagan's presidency. But anyway, the point is that he was trying to figure out how old people were by asking roundabout questions, trying to put their birthday or their childhood on a timeline of other events. Just go ahead and just directly ask, right? Don't lead the audience. So instead of asking something like, "Do you think class is a waste of time?" You might ask something more like, "Are class sessions productive for you?" Because this way you kind of have a judgment, the waste of time inside the question. And I know that it seems like you do here. Are class sessions productive for you? But this um, is negative enough that it probably will flavor the answer that you'll get. Whereas if you ask, "Are class sessions productive for you?" It's the fact that you start it with "are" and end it with "for you." It kind of has the better idea of that you want their opinion on productivity in class. Um, you, you could also ask something even vaguer, like, what is your opinion on the productivity of our live broadcast sessions? Right? That would probably actually, you know what? I should add that as a bullet point on this slide here because that would be probably the best with the least leading um, question in it. So the best phrase would probably be, "What is your opinion on the productivity of class?" And that would really make sure that the question is not leading. But just for that example there and having me rant about I think you can see also that creating good surveys is an art. It's not. There's not really a science to it. Um, the general advice I'll give you here about not leading the audience is try your best to avoid putting in a value judgment inside your question. Now you can ask things like, "Do you think the wall between the United States and Mexico is a good or bad idea?" Like you can definitely ask that. And have it be asked that way, and that's not really leading because you have both value judgments inside the question. Like I said, this is a tricky topic, and we'll revisit it, but this is just a really quick survey of surveys. So before I move on, are there any questions about what might be good in a survey or what might be a good question? I haven't looked at every single survey that's been submitted so far. I saw that there were some around 10 a.m. My time, so I went ahead and looked at those. But if you submitted it later than that, I haven't had a chance. I've put it in my special folder in my email, but I haven't actually looked at it yet. All right, it's been a few moments of silence. I'll keep checking the chat window, but I think we're ready to move on to our other topic, which is also going to be really fairly quick. We've only been live for about 29 minutes, and I don't think we need to be live that much longer. Um, so, so good informative topic ideas. I've had a lot of people ask me what are some good ideas for your informative topic, and really I just have kind of four guidelines here. Good informative topics do not ask students to take a stand. So, in other words, you will not write your speech from the standpoint or from the viewpoint of, by the end of this speech, classmate, I would like for you to think that Star Trek: The Next Generation is the best Star Trek there is. Really, your stance is going to be very general. It's going to say something. You're going to say something like, Star Trek was a very popular show, and I think that everybody should know the characters and general themes of the series. And that's it. Right? You're not asking your students to make a value judgment. You're not asking your fellow students or your audience to um, really do anything in particular other than to be polite and to listen. Um, and you also should not necessarily take a stand during your speech. Um, for example, you shouldn't say something like, I think Star Trek The Next Generation is the best show ever, and here's why. Because that still actually kind of mixes it with the persuasion. So saying that you think it's the best ever and here's why is very similar, and really in practice is basically the same as saying you should think Star Trek: The Next Generation is the best show ever, right? Because the idea there is functionally the same. So you basically want to avoid making the speech persuasive. Um, do not ask for a value judgment from your audience. Don't ask for them to agree or disagree with you. Okay. Um, all right. Excellent. I think that's fairly sums that up. Um, the next things that good informative topic ideas should have are about things that are interesting to you. I really don't want this class to be. I mean, gosh, we are an online section and we're starting behind the eight ball a little bit, just from the mediated nature of the class. We don't necessarily need to make this into a class where I look at you and I say, Meg LaFollette and Natalie Erdman, you're going to be working on the rainforest for this speech, and you're not even remotely interested in the rainforest. Sorry, I just pulled your names right out of the chat list there, but um, we're not going to. I don't want to assign or have us have to assign you any topics. You should just pick something that's interesting to you. Um, and you can also kind of think about this speech if you want to do a persuasive speech eventually about a sensitive issue. Like, let's say and I have usually at least one of these a year. If someone chooses to do a speech about abortion, um, it's totally legitimate. We're a free market of ideas. So if you want to look at this informative speech as a kind of a litmus test for the attitudes in the room, or as in terms of the attitudes in the class, I guess we're not really in the same room, are we? Then you can, um, by giving an informative speech about some aspect of the abortion policy or phenomenon, if you would like, and if that's truly what is interesting to you. But again, you do not ask students to take a stand. You do not take a stand, and you want to avoid at any point making the speech persuasive. You're just, um, you know what? We could use the word here. You are educating the audience about your topic. Okay. So anyway, make it about something that's interesting to you. So if family matters is not really what's in your heart about what's interesting, then don't keep yourself as that topic. You still have time before the actual due date of your surveys to change your topic. Anyway, are things that you think people should know about. So there are some topics that I'll let you kind of take a stand on in the terms of you think it's important for people to know, and that is why you are informing us. So in my first example, I think I actually phrased it this way, where I said Star Trek: The Next Generation is a really popular show, or was a really popular show, and I feel that everyone should have some basic information about it. I'm not asking them to pass judgment on the show itself. I'm simply taking the stance that I am educating you on this topic because I feel that it is important to know about. So that's totally okay too. So between these two ideas here, um, hopefully you find a topic that you're passionate about that you don't mind working on for the next week or so, right? Including this survey here. All right. Well, that's all the content I had really prepared for this particular live broadcast. I based my preparation tonight based on your comments and emails that I've been getting over the next week. I hope it cleared up some things for you. Let me know if you have any other questions. I'm going to hang out here and we're going to kind of chillax with some awkward silence until I'm convinced that the live chat um, is the speech going to have a time limit or a required audience. Um, it will have a time limit, and I will. We're going to work in the idea of an audience by having you share it with some classmates. But as far as them being live, no, not necessarily. I mean, if you've got one of the things I'm going to have you do for this speech, and again, I keep in mind I will assign this formally next week. All right, so um, the response now is going to be kind of vague. But what I will have you do is I want you to get some peer feedback from someone who's watched your speech in addition to the feedback that I will give you. Um, so if you have someone that's going to be conveniently located nearby, and by nearby I mean maybe they already share your house or your living situation or something, and you want to have them watch your speech and you can give them the peer evaluation form I'm going to post, more power to you. Go ahead and do it all in one day. But otherwise, no. I mean, you don't need a live audience for this one, or a required audience for this one. I will, like I said, I will have you, when you post your video up, I will have you share it with literally two people, either from this class or from somewhere. Um, but otherwise, no. No, I know there are some sections, and you can go ahead and keep asking questions. I'm not going to rant too much about this longer, but I know there are some sections that say that you have to have like 5 people with you while you video record. Um, but that takes a long time to schedule. um, and it takes me when we actually have speeches that are worth, like, actually, when I say worth, but when I actually have to um, pay more attention than just see if you answered the questions or not. And I have to give more feedback than that. Um, it takes me a long time to also evaluate how you're responding to your audience, and it's not. I don't find it very useful. Anyway, rant over. Other questions? And yes, and again, Natalie, there is a time limit. It's 6 minutes. Now, as far as the minimum time, I don't think it's more than 4. In fact, let me look. I can look it up while I wait for another question. Just make absolutely sure I'm giving you right information, because these assignments are designed in your workbook. They're not necessarily designed by me. Absolutely sure that what I tell you is consistent with the program. Okay, and I did make a mistake. The minimum time is 3 minutes. So yeah, it needs to be around 3 minutes for credit. Now, if it comes out to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, that's a little bit too short. But once I assign this formally and I kind of go over what kinds of things you can work into your speech, I'm very confident that everyone here will make a 3-minute speech. In fact, some people were able to do it with their intro speech. So it's not going to be a real. Hopefully, it shouldn't be something that you're scratching your head about for a long time, trying to figure out. Okay, I don't see any questions going over live chat. As always, you can email me, and I'm. Oh wait, I just saw. When will this speech be due? Ginny, great question. Um, the speeches, we're going to sign them formally next week. My intention is to give you that week and probably at least a couple few days in the next week to work on it. Um, so that sets the due date up for not this coming Friday, but and not the next coming Friday, but the one after. So I sound unsure. I know how many weeks I want you to work on this. I sound unsure because I do believe that's going to put us in March. I want to let's you know what? I can't do anything without you seeing it, so I'm going to have to embarrass myself here and look for my calendar app. All right, so let's see. Not this Friday, not this coming. Yeah, it's going to be March 3rd. Boom. And if we can't make that deadline, if people are like, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this in this amount of time," you know what? Especially if enough people say that, I will give you either personally or as a group. I'll just extend the due date. And that's another thing too. Is like if I give you an assignment and for whatever reason stuff is going on in your life and it's going to take you. Usually, I try to give you 7 full days to do something. And if you envision that it's going to take you longer than that, just send me an email and I will give you either an extension or we'll make arrangements. This is an asynchronous course, so we can take full advantage of that. But anyway, great question. Looks like it's going to be due on the 3rd. Jenny, you will turn in an outline. Um, I said I wasn't going to do this, but we can go ahead and talk about it just a little bit. I'm not formally assigning it yet, but we can talk about it a little bit. For me, on your workbook on page 131 is an instructor's evaluation form for the informative speech. There's several copies of this in here, so this is just the one I happen to turn to, but they're all the same, so don't worry about it. It does say under the you will need an outline with reference list and of course having any speaking notes. Now I don't actually grade your speaking notes, but you should have them prepared, and it should be obvious by looking at your video feed that you have speaking notes to speak from. Now, if you want to, again, some of you for the intro speech I noticed actually had the notes off camera, and that's totally fine. I could tell they were there because you were looking off camera to get them. But as long as it's clear that as long as you turn in your formal outline with a reference list, and we'll talk about that. Don't worry. Um, and your speaking notes, and that your speaking notes are obviously prepared while you were recording. That's all right. But that would be what you turn in. And again, we'll talk more about the outlining when I formally assign this speech, because this is the first speech where we're going to have a formal kind of outline. Great questions. I'm still here. I'm just kind of running the clock to see if there's any. Okay. And it doesn't look like there's any more questions. I think I waited enough for the time to pass and for people to write. So again, if you have any questions between this broadcast and the next one, again, we should be returning to our regular schedule on Wednesday as around 7:30 for these broadcasts. Now that I'm back to my normal situation with my normal hardware, my normal wired internet connection, we should be back to having it regular. So um, thank you again for your patience the past week and a half. Thank you for your efforts and keeping up with the course, by the way, everybody. The fact that you asked me questions is something I take as an enormous positive. Um, so, keep at it, keep asking questions. Um, Again, and if you have questions, email me. And I generally can get back to you within a day or so. Um, I know that my response over the weekend was kind of lacking, but I do travel. That's something I guess I should warn you about too. This weekend and the next weekend, I will be traveling with the debate team. So if you have a question, say on like Friday night, chances I will probably not. Unfortunately, I will probably not get around to it until Monday morning, because I am with the debate team. We travel all over the country. We're going to be out of town, so. But otherwise, yes, I will try to respond within like a day or so, and um, that's kind of what's going on in the next week in terms of my out of broadcast availability. But you're doing great. You guys are doing great. I'm really pleased with your progress and your efforts in the class. So again, no worries. Be happy and have a great evening.